Good morning and welcome back to Spidz YouTube. The announcement regarding the news for LoR was quite a little bit ago. Like, I don't think it was over a month ago, but it was certainly more than a couple of weeks ago. And I wanted to give my thoughts on it, because I think my perspective's a little bit different from a lot of the other people that I'm reading about, whether it be on Discord or Twitter.com or whether it be like YouTube.com, right? And I just want to talk about like my own perspective on what happened with LOR. So I'm going to split this video into four parts. Four parts. Three parts. Okay, sorry. My table of contents I wrote down twice because I changed how I wanted to format this video halfway through. Um, there are three parts. I'm going to talk about LOR universally, right? So pull me out of the equation. What are my thoughts on LOR and, what LOR did well, what LOR did badly, and very specifically about the recent announcement and, all the irritations that we have regarding it. Then in part two, I want to talk about what LOR meant for me and what my future is regarding both, video games and content-y things and all these sorts of things, right? I want to break down what LOR sort of meant for me over the past 4 years or so. And then I know a lot of people like Boulevard and Sir Termund and Margin Bead haven't talked about the Path of Champions too much. I want to talk about that a little bit. I think I have some thoughts that I wanted to articulate at some point about the Path of Champions. I just wish it wasn't because of something spurred on due to a change in Riot's organization. So I want to talk about what LOR did quite well, because I think it's very easy to talk about the things that LOR failed at post announcement, right? I remember a couple of days after the announcement and the FAQ, right, on February 2nd, everyone was talking about the failings of, they say they tried to monetize but not really, like clearly it just wasn't how it was supposed to work. But LOR was like a fucking amazing game, right? Like it was incredibly, incredibly beautiful. And I mean, like the visuals obviously are beautiful. Things like the card art and the boards and even the login screen. I think the UI was quite a bit as well. I think LOR was an extremely pretty game. And I don't think it's just the visuals. I think the gameplay was just incredibly, incredibly beautiful, right? The sort of back and forth nature that the game sort of lended itself towards, I think was something very special to me that I haven't seen in a lot of other games that I've tried to play. There's a sort of like beauty in the way the game feels when you're in the middle of a match that I think is really, really something that I'm going to miss quite a bit from LOR going into the future if the game just doesn't continue, right? And I presume that to be the case. I think the game was really deep, right? The sort of intricacies regarding matchups and certain gameplay patterns that the game sort of lended itself towards. Like maybe not every single game, but I'd say at least 1 in 5 games, you would have a really, really tight spot that would determine the fate of whether that game was a win or a loss multiple turns before the actual win or defeat screen occurs on the screen, right? And the difficulty of decision points like that were really, really fascinating to think about. And I really, really value a game that can do that. And I think LOR had some sort of really good formula in forcing those sort of things to occur, right? I'm thinking like in many, many matchups that I would have played with decks like Red Gwen and Sivir Akshan, I would find these spots that would have quite tough decisions. And obviously, having played those decks a lot, these spots, I have intuitions on what they would feel like, but nonetheless, a lot of thinking would be required for these spots. And I think LOR was really, really successful at making those positions, right? I think LOR was incredibly fun, and I think the expansions were really good in LOR, just generally. Don't want to say it's the first game that I've ever played that was like live servicey and had regularized expansions, but it kind of was, right? Like prior, my main games that I used to play prior were like Team Fortress 2, which when I started playing basically didn't get regularized expansions. Isaac, which got, 4 DLCs, but it wasn't really regularized. And like Plants vs. Zombies Heroes, which it got like 3 updates while I was playing it, but we never knew when they would happen, right? But I remember for LOR always being excited for the next expansion, and being part of the expansion hype cycle was very, very interesting to me. I think like I have strong, strong memories of the Targon expansion and thinking that this isn't just going to stay here for Targon. We're going to have one for Dreamer and one for what we, didn't know yet was Bandle City, but had some guesses that it might be the Bandle City, right? I just think that all of these things that LOR did really, really well, I don't really want to forget about LOR. I still think like very highly of those trailers they made for things like ASOL and Renekton, and um, there was another one that was really really good that I don't remember. I think Aatrox I also quite liked a lot. Azir as well. That one was a really really good trailer. And I know that for and I'm a few weeks old on this, right? I started working on the slides that I'm reading off quite a bit ago, and I think everyone's past the sort of like immediate sadness, but I remember watching Margin Bay and Sir Terman talk about the game and not talking a lot about, what they loved about it. They just said, I love the game, and it makes sense. The game's very, very good, and I'm going to miss it a lot when it inevitably, goes away with the competition. But LOR did quite a few things really, really well, and every game of LOR, not every game, but most games of LOR felt absolutely phenomenal, right? It felt beautiful and deep. That being said, there are obviously some failings, and this is where we talk about what everyone's been talking about, or had talked about regarding the announcement, right? In my mind, the main takeaway I had from the first announcement, where they said, we're going to backtrack from LOR before we got the FAQ in the video, was that one thing that was sort of passively said about LOR that I don't think was really articulated in a strong way, but I think it sort of characterizes LOR now that we have the information that we've got now, is that there was always this bet that LOR was making, right? Which was that if they make a very accessible card game, that the player influx will be able to be satisfied in such a high degree that they'll get the money that they want from cosmetics, right? And that's the play that Riot Games has always done, right? With Teamfight Tactics and with League of Legends and with Valorant, right? This has always been their MO for games. And so I don't think this bet was too surprising to expect from them, but it is a bet if you take it out of Riot Games and think of it more as like a CCG thing. It is a big bet to try and make. And it's a bet that now we know didn't work, but for the past 4 years we've had this assumption that this bet didn't work greatly, but it wasn't a failing bet, right? It wasn't a bet that worked badly in Riot's favor, or it worked badly against Riot. It was just neutral, right? Was our interpretation before we got the news, in January and early February. And it sucks that bet didn't work, right? It really saddens me, because this bet was very, very successful for the people that were playing the game, right? And it created one of the best games I've played. And it sucks that the bet didn't work, but that was the bet that they made, and the bet, unfortunately, wasn't what they needed. That being said, there were other things that didn't work out. I think, the fact that the game didn't release in China is a major one, and I think the bet would have been way more successful had the game be able to be released in China. I think a lot of the decisions in the background that we can't see because we're not in the background, probably doesn't highlight the amount of difficulty that the Riot team probably went through to try and get the game into China. This is conspiracy theory time, but I'm imagining that things like the lack of cross shard and some of like the slightly longer hiatuses might have been trying to work towards the China goal, and they decided that it just wasn't worth it. And they say that in the FAQ that they released a few weeks later, that they put effort into it and they realized that if you did the cost benefit analysis between working for a long time to try and get the game to release in China and not, that it was just better not to. Obviously, we can look at that and say, well, this line didn't work, so you should have done the other one, idiot. But I think like maybe that's true, but I wouldn't doubt it to say that it wasn't true, right? At the end of the day, whether it's the developers or greedy capitalists behind them, they would have gone for the China line if they thought it was right, and it seems that unfortunately it was not nonetheless. Then there's obviously the issue that there was nothing for us to spend money on, right? Like there was technically things to spend money on. I find it very funny that when they list things like boards and guardians and skins, they always put prismatics in that same list, which like, yeah, I guess prismatics was something to spend money on. If you wanted to fully prismatic your deck, that is a way to generate revenue for Riot, but it wasn't really something appealing for a lot of people. And obviously with the skins, right, we can all talk about $10 for 2 PNGs or whatever. That isn't to say the skins weren't beautiful or the skins weren't great, but the economic, niche that they were trying to go for, it wasn't necessarily overly appealing to whales, I don't think, and it wasn't necessarily appealing to the average video gamer. And I think it just missed its mark, right? And I think like most of us have felt that, right? That it just wasn't really what we wanted to spend money on if we were going to spend money on this video game. I also think the advertisements point that they make in the article is very, very interesting. The thing they talk about like investing in the players that they currently have and sort of reigniting their fervor into being interested in LOR, as opposed to trying to go into a wider scope to bring them in, to bring other players in, right? I think it's an interesting thing that I've never really thought about too deeply from a consumer perspective. And it's something that I can see why they would default to that logic. Obviously, again, we see the result of this and we can say, oh, it's short-sighted because the game failed. Look, the game failed. This is proof that it was short-sighted and you should have done this other line. And like, maybe that's true, but we can also be there on the other side of another universe where that wasn't the case and they didn't invest in us and they tried to advertise elsewhere and nothing occurred and it was money going into a sink, right? I think that was less likely, but obviously I'm sort of thinking that was less likely because I've experienced this world and I know what happened in this world, but we don't know what would have happened in the world where they don't do that, right? Nonetheless, I think like I can believe that and still think it was stupid the way they did advertisements. And I still think they should have, in some capacity, tried to advertise to the greater scope of the world, whether it be to other CCGs. I know, like, early on, they tried to work with streamers. I don't consume Twitch basically at all, or very, very minorly. So I'm not too into Twitch culture, and I can't tell how effective that would have been, but I know it definitely got some people to play Legends of Runeterra. But, you know, this is the part of the video where I also say it's crazy that they didn't put the game in League until the game was dead. But you know, it's still crazy that's weird that they didn't do it that way. But these failings, while they're sort of evident to us now, especially the context of the bet, right? And maybe had the game been had the game not done the bet of, you know, give the game to us for free as opposed to making us pay for packs, maybe the game would have been more successful. But that isn't the game that we got, and it's kind of not the game that I fell in love with regarding LOR. Then the last thing I want to talk about regarding LOR universally before I get on a soapbox and just talk about my own thing, is that I was telling my dad about this, about, you know, all of the LOR stuff. He doesn't know a lot about LOR, but he knows that I was casting Worlds, and then, like, you know, a month later, I'm with him for a lunch thing, and then I said, oh, by the way, LOR's, you know, dead. It was the day, you know, that we got the announcement, and he was guffawed that we somehow went from casting Worlds to LOR having no more investment, and it sort of blindsided him. And to me, like, it kind of blindsided me, but it's funny thinking about it from his perspective that there was this hobby that I've had for many, many years, and I'm just, you know, it just peaked with all this, you know, world stuff, and then it just goes kaput immediately after. I remember the first couple of days after the event, the announcement was that I felt really bad for both Red and Boulevard primarily. Both of those people have put insane amounts of effort into Legends of Runeterra, and I was very sad to hear the news from their perspective. I think Boulevard's video is still the saddest one of the content creator videos about the announcement. Another thing that I thought was interesting about the announcement was that it seems to me to say that, like, the open system isn't automatic. There's some sort of manual process behind it that needs to run it, right? It was something that Sleepy Punter brought up to attention to me, that it should be something that should be automatic, right? It shouldn't be something that requires any level of manual effort. The only cost that it should have from a server side, at least from, like, my amateur understanding, is that it should just be like the costs of running the technology, right? Whether that be, you know, hosting the server for people to play the games on, or having it as part of the client that can be downloaded, right? Those are the only things I can imagine be costing, and, like, maybe that cost exists, but it's very interesting to see that they decided that that cost is not worth it. Or it's not automatic and it's manual, which would mean that the cost is even more for whatever manual system they have to do behind it, whether it be man hours or whatever technology, you know, top cost that there is. I just thought it was interesting that the opens seem to not be automatic, and that we do have the final open soon. Which was a bit sad. I like the fact that I topped the last open, which was the For Fun open. It would have been cool to think that I topped the first and the last open that had the board as prizing. But never mind, I guess. That's pretty much all I want to talk about regarding LOR universally, right? Like when you take me out of the story, right? And I know I've referred to myself a few times in this, but generally, right? LOR was a really, really incredibly beautiful game with amazing gameplay and very, very deep decision making, with very cool content for us that we ended up consuming, right? Worlds and seasonals, that they were phenomenal, right? Generally speaking, they weren't maybe as good as other games that Riot has made, such as League of Legends and Valorant, right? But those are much bigger titles, right? For what we got, the expansion cycle and the balance cycle and what we got out of Worlds and Seasonals was honestly really, really good. And as someone that's never consumed esports, right, watching that first seasonal still felt very impactful to me. Same with being part of these expansions. I really felt a lot of enjoyment from LOR, and LOR accomplished quite a lot in that capacity. There are obviously the failings of the bet and inaccessibility to China, that we didn't have anything to spend money on, and the weirdness of advertisements. And the announcement obviously hurt a lot of people. That's all I really want to talk about before I get on my own soapbox and make this into Spidz YouTube as opposed to just LOI YouTube. Um, and I wanted to start by talking about my own history with LOR, right? Before LOR, the only card game that I had played was a game called Plants vs. Zombies Heroes. It's the card game based on the Plants vs. Zombies IP, I guess. And that game was quite fun, right? I really, really enjoyed that game. But it's the only CCG I ever really cared for. I played maybe 10 hours of Hearthstone, primarily doing the puzzles, right? I thought the puzzles were very fun in Hearthstone, and that was about it. And I played a bunch of Slay the Spire and other rogue building deck lights, other deck building roguelikes. And getting into LOR was primarily a consequence of playing Plants vs. Zombies Heroes, right? I spent a lot of time in the Plants vs. Zombies Heroes community, and a good friend of mine, Roma, got me into Legends of Runeterra, right? It was a game that he saw somewhere and was like, hey, do you want to play this game? And a few of us from Plants vs. Zombies Heroes got into it at the same time. People like Sushi and Justini. And it was a great time. I enjoyed Legends of Runeterra the second time that I played it. The first time that I played it was during one of the betas. I want to say the second one because I signed up too late to get to the first one. And I did a few scrims, I guess, or friendly games, I guess is the more accurate way to describe it with Roma. And it was an okay time, but I didn't think too greatly of the game. And then they released the gay poro, and I've mentioned this a few times. They released the gay poro in Legends of Runeterra sometime after Bilgewater was released, and Roma was like, "Hey, you know that game that you don't play? There's this free thing in it. It's a gay poro," and I was like, "Holy hell, free gay poro! I have to play the game." And then we did some practice matches, and I fell in love with the game, right? And the deck that I first created for LOR was this Elise Karma aggro deck. Now, Karma's not an aggro champion, but I had Elise, and I had a bunch of aggro Elise cards, and then Karma had some like Ionia cards that looked kind of aggressive, and then Karma looked cool to me as someone that really, really liked infinite value engines from Plants vs. Zombies Heroes. And so like Calm Aggro, right? The Karma aggro deck that I first made was like sort of my first love in LOR. And when I think of, early 2020 for me, Karma aggro was like a big part of what I fell in love with LOR. Eventually that converted into One Cost Madness, which I played for God knows, many, many years, right? I still play One Cost Madness, which is my Taskmaster Jinx. It used to be Teemo. I changed it to Nilla kind of recently. But Teemo Jinx, PNZ Bilgewater with Professor Von Yip and Taskmaster. I pretty much played that deck nonstop for like months, right? I used to try to climb with it all the time. And the amount of refinement and logic that I put into learning that deck was quite large for me. I pretty much learnt most of my like card game concepts, or at least early game card game concepts, based on trying to refine this deck, right? In Plants vs. Zombies Heroes, I never really took card game strategy seriously, right? I would read what people say about, this card is good and this card is bad. But I would play the cards that give me the most fun and dopamine, and I would end up with that, right? But with One Cost Madness, I would really think critically about, like, what is my deck's win cons? How am I trying to accentuate those win cons? And what decks and what cards and synergy should I put in this deck to achieve that, right? And I really appreciated One Cost Madness for trying to do that. I'm talking about these as decks because I think there are many ways to think about your history in in anything, right? And I think thinking about my history of LOR as decks, I think is a very, very funny idea. Nonetheless, that's mostly what I played in late 2020 going into 2021. Then in 2021, the sort of deck that I've picked out as the deck that I associate with it a lot is Victor Aphelios, right? Aphelios released at the end of Targon, and Victor Aphelios was the first deck that I took to Masters. I watched an LNZQ YouTube video, I think, about the deck, and I was like, this deck's for me, and I played the hell out of Victor Aphelios, and I had a really, really good time with it. It got me to Masters very, very easily, I'll say. I didn't qualify for a seasonal that season. I think it took me a little while to break past the top 700 barrier. But Victor Aphelios was a very comfy deck for me at the time. Then, you know, at the end of 2021, BBG made a video about Sivarakshan Demacia, and I think it was like a few days after that video was the seasonal tournament for that season, and Sivarakshan Demacia was like just starting to become a deck for that seasonal tournament, and I was playing it just like a day and a bit before it became the main deck, at least from my perspective, as someone that wasn't in competitive circles, was just someone that was, you know, randomly finding YouTube videos. Like, I think this is probably the only BBG video I watched, and I watched like 10 LNZQ videos when I saw the Victor Aphelios one. Like, I wasn't a big viewer of these things, but I played a bunch of Sivarakshan, right? And I think when I think of late 2021 and early 2022, Sivarakshan is obviously like a massive part of that. It's a deck that I brought to my first tournament, which was the OS Invitational, and with Scouts and Draven Rumble. And Sivarakshan became a mainstay for me for like quite a while in the tournaments that I used to play, right? I would bring it to every single tournament. I brought it to all the top cuts, you know. It was a big deck for me, and it was a very, very comforting deck that I could play whenever I wanted to. And I think like I don't think of myself too much as like the Sivarakshan person. I know some people think of me that way, but I don't really think of myself that way that aggressively. But Sivarakshan was obviously a big part of my LOR history, right? Like, I started with this silly Karma aggro deck that I went into One Cost Madness and Victor Aphelios, right? And Sivarakshan was like a big part of my ongoing story with my relationship with LOR. Then obviously Gwen released, and I became a massive Red Gwen enjoyer when I think Annie gave me a deck that Trevo had created, and it was made just before that seasonal tournament, and everyone thought it was either really good or not very good, and I brought it to the top cut, and I got top 8 with it. I think I lost to Ptash, but I still got the board. And that was the one that 4LW won. Cup came second. It was the Kaisar seasonal, and my lineup was Red Gwen, Sivarakshan, and Sermon Pirates. And that was a very fun seasonal. I think that was probably my favorite seasonal that I've participated in. Obviously, I mean, you might say it's because it was the highest seasonal placement I ever got, but it was also just like a great time. I had a great time with the decks. I went 9-0 that season as well. I think it was the only 9-0. Because there was, you know, sometimes if not everyone signs up, it becomes only 1-9-0. I'm pretty sure. Anyway, for late 2022 and, you know, most of 2023, I think of myself as like someone that plays a lot of Red Gwen and was a massive Gwen enjoyer, and it sort of helped me figure out what I really liked about what I played in LOR, right? Which was a lot of Shadow Isle stuff and a lot of like these tempo heavy decks like Sivarakshan and Red Gwen. And then end of 2023, they released Morgana, who I think is my favorite champion ever released in LOR. I love everything about it. And obviously 2023 was a very different year for me for LOR. Like, when I'm talking about these previous years, I'm only talking about the decks, because my relationship with LOR was primarily the decks that I played on ladder and the conversations I had with like Roma and my close friends, right? This is before I joined the Discord servers for a lot of these, at least until I got to Masters, when I joined the Masters of Runeterra Discord server. So for a lot of these, like, my relationship with LOR was primarily just fully about the gameplay that I loved, right? I know in Sir Terman's video, he talks about how, like, before he made content creation, he just played the game and loved it, right? And that's, I think, the same for me as well, right? I played the game for about 1.5 years before it ever became more than just a game to me, right? Before it became, a community piece when I started playing in tournaments, and a competitive outlet when I started playing tournaments, which is what the Civ Action and the Gwen section sort of mattered to me with. And then in 2023, it became something that involved casting and doing little content-y things, like the VOD reviews that I put on Spidz YouTube, which ended up, finishing up with Worlds, right? And I think, there are different. The person that you are changes over time, right? You aren't the same person as you were a few years ago, and for me, that is the same. There's that same truth for Legends of Runeterra, right? At the start, the Spidz that played Legends of Runeterra played it because it was a fun game, right? With the Karma aggro and the one-cost madness. And as the game went on, as I played, I got to Masters for the first time, played in my first seasonal, and I was able to top cut my second or third seasonal with the Civ Action. The game changed in what it was to me, right? And that obviously was most prominently the case in 2023, where I started my first cast, like, very, very late 2022, and I did Aegis, and I did the Mastering Runeterra Open, which led to doing 2 or 3 opens, which led to doing Worlds, and that sort of relationship with the game changed drastically in the last year. And so now the game became way more than just a game that was fun, right? And I wanted to talk about that particularly, right? I think, like, when I read people talk about the announcement for LOR, not in competitive circles, like in more casual circles, like maybe Reddit.com. A somewhat common sentiment is that there's this sort of. I want to figure out how I want to put this. One thing that I think is interesting about talking about games like LOR, or any game that has a meaning to you, is that when we think about LOR generally, we think that every LOR player is meeting in the center of this, like, okay, nexus is the word I want to use here, which is a funny word to use in this context, but there's like this nexus of what an LOR player is. They've got these traits, and these traits are what you get out of a player for a game like LOR, right? And when a change is made to LOR, it's to appeal to the traits that make up an LOR player, right? And it's sort of a self-regulating cycle, right? The decisions that the developers make sort of determine the traits of the players that an LOR player are. But in general, I think the way that people think, at least when I've interacted with people, is that the way they view a given LOR player is that they've got these traits that every LOR player sort of overlaps on, which I think is inaccurate. I think it's better to see the world as, the people that we all are. We've got our different personality matrices, which, if you can imagine, like, those pentagons that, at the center, it's like a pentagon graph. It may not always have to be a pentagon, where at the center, there's like someone that has very little of a trait that is described at the edge of the pentagon, or the corner of the pentagon, and the amount that you are of that trait extends the line from the center to the edge of the pentagon, right? I think it's pretty. I remember seeing this in a Wii game at some point, and seeing, like, the type of player that you are of a certain thing being accentuated via the traits that you've got in the corners of these pentagons, right? Now, I'm going to call this a personality matrix. I think the better way to view LOR is that instead of all of our personality matrices being the exact same and overlapping on each other, and LORs trying to hit that type of personality matrix, instead, all of our personality matrices that everyone has in the world aligns at slightly different points at the corners of these matrices, right? And what LOR does is it grapples people that can have LOR in some capacity on their personality matrix. This idea makes a lot of sense in my head, and hopefully I can visually represent this somehow. Because if I don't visually represent this somehow, I think it's going to be really confusing what I'm trying to articulate here. But the way that I see this is that we all have our own personality matrices that are trying to pinpoint specific parts of ourselves into whatever thing we like to do. Like, if you think about a single person's personality matrix, the things that they do all satisfy certain, spines or edges of that personality matrix, right? The things that they are great at or desire for. They have things that pluck onto those parts, right? LOR does that for a bunch of people on a very certain spine, right? When people complain about, you know, LOR's too mid-rangey, I wanted a game like this. What they're really saying is that the way that I viewed LOR is that I want it to fulfill this part of my personality matrix, and the decision that has recently been made by Riot doesn't agree with my perspective on where LOR can fit on my personality matrix. And when people talk about what they want from the game, or what balance changes they want, or metas that they liked, it's all about their own perspective of where LOR fit on their personality matrix. There was a conversation I was reading recently about that some friends of mine were having about whether competitive LOR was at odds or diametrically opposed with fun LOR, right? And I think your answer to that question solely depends on where you view what your own personality matrix is and where you wanted to pluck LOR on that personality matrix, right? There's surely a more succinct way of describing the way I'm doing it. I'm thinking of this very metaphorically in the visual that I've created in my own brain. But I think for a lot of people, when LOR's announcement happened and a lot of the competitive players had gone, it's because the things that they get rid of in the announcement, such as upcoming expansions and opens and all these sorts of things, the competitive desires, is where LOR was on their personality matrix, even if prior it may not have been there, right? Nonetheless, I hope this analogy doesn't get too bogged down. My main point with this analogy, before I talk about what I wanted to talk about next, was that there are things that I want from my own perspective, from a personality matrix that I've got on what I want for myself and what I want out of my hobbies, right? LOR was able to hit a very specific point on that personality matrix that was very, very good. And with the announcement, the question that becomes for me as well as a bunch of other people is, okay, what next for that part of our personality matrix? Can LOR still fit in that or not, right? And that's the question that people make, right? When people talk about moving to other games, what they're saying is, other games can fill that spot on the personality matrix, like Shadowverse, like One Piece, like whatever, right? Sit with that analogy for now. I will come back to it later. I wanted to talk slightly less metaphorically and more about what LOR was for me in terms of my own personality matrix in this sense, right? Which is to say, at the start, LOR was just a fun game, right? It didn't accomplish anything on my personality matrix except be fun, right? And the funness, you can argue, was like also connected to, the fact that the gameplay was difficult in as much as it required like strategy and thought, right? It was a strategic game. And that it had beautiful art, right? These are sort of things that are relevant, but primarily what I wanted out of LOR was that it would be fun for me, and it was. It was a fun game, right? Then, 2 years later, I interact with the LOR community, and then LOR becomes two things. It becomes a fun game and a good community, right? Then I play in my first seasonal and I play in my first tournaments, and then it becomes three things: a fun game, a good community, and a competitive place. The way my personality matrix is changing, right? I never really cared about competition before this, is that LOR has opened me up to things that I like about, video games, right? And things that I've discovered that I like more and more. It has warped my personality matrix because the person that you are is simply a consequence of the things that you spend time with and the people you're around, right? From that, LOR has now become three things, right? It used to just be a fun game. It used to just hit one spot on my personality matrix. Now it's hitting three. It's hitting fun game, good community, and a competitive place. Then, towards the start of this year and the end of the start of last year and the end of last year, it then became a casting opportunity, right? Which is a new thing that LOR has become for me. And then finally, at the end, it became an obvious content-y pipeline, right? For things like the VOD reviews. These are now five things that LOR has become, when at the start it was just one, right? This is because my personality matrix changes over time. Everyone's does. The person that you are is not the same that you were many years ago, right? But LOR need not be the only thing on that personality matrix. It need not be the only thing that I use to fulfill these traits that I now realize I desire as a person that's trying to get these things, my personality matrix, satisfied, right? For many people, they would need just the third thing, which is the competitive place, right? And so that's why people are moving to other competitive games, right? Same for community, right? If people are looking for a good sense of community, they might move to other games that have good community just because that's their desire, right? When I'm thinking people like Boulevard, I think for Boulevard, LOR was quite much a casting opportunity, and He doesn't know if another game can satisfy what he needs from his personality matrix, as well as like possibly a work thing, right? I'm talking about this from a hobby perspective. Obviously, if you're doing it for money, it obviously changes quite a little bit, right? But for everyone, after the announcement, they're trying to work out what can fulfill their personality matrix that LOR did just so succinctly and beautifully, right? Now, for me, if I go through these 5 things, a fun game, a good community, a competitive place, a casting opportunity, and a contenty pipe, I can replace these that in ways that are still satisfactory to me. So, for example, a good community doesn't require LOR, right? I had a good community in Plants vs. Zombies Heroes before I played LOR, and I assume that I'm going to find good communities in my future as well for whatever games that I end up playing, or even non-games things, right? Like uni, like the friends that I've made in my life, right? It should be noted that, like, you know, the fact that LOR is going means that, or competitive LOR is going, which means that there won't be these sort of like open forums to just passively talk about LOR with someone for multiple hours, right? I can't really join a Discord call with someone I've never spoken to, that's in an LOR server, and be able to talk about LOR for ages, because we won't be playing LOR in like 6 months, right? I'll still maintain friendships with people that I've already created friendships with, or in some capacity, but these things will probably inevitably dwindle to some capacity because the baseline conversation piece that starts the social glue is no longer there in LOR. But a good community can be replaced, right? LOR need not be the thing that fills my good community matrix, right? A competitive place is another thing that LOR did to me, and that isn't strictly necessary in my life. I don't feel a strong need to be at the top of competition. That's never what drove me in LOR. When I say a competitive place, what I want is a game that's like strategically depth and keeps asking me to make strategically deep decisions, right? That's what I want from a hobby like a game, right? I've had that in the past. I used to play a bunch of roguelikes like Isaac. I used to, play Plants vs. Zombies Heroes, which also kind of pretended to ask that sort of question, right? And I can continue moving back to roguelikes for making tough strategic decisions, right? I have been playing a bunch since the announcement, and that's fine. I need not move to something like One Piece or Shadowverse for that fix, right? That fix of having a strategically deep experience, I need not from a card game, right? A casting opportunity is another thing that LOR was for me. This is one that I have to think about a little bit more deeply, right? I think I sort of lucked into casting as just a thing that happened in my life, and it's not something I put a lot of critical thought into, or something that I wanted to like achieve from before I started doing it, right? I could continue casting. I enjoy casting a lot. I think it's extremely fun, and when I casted the APAC Brawl with Bandit Keith a couple of days ago, I really felt how much I missed casting. There's something just incredibly fun about the explaining the strategy and what is interesting about the thing that we're watching to an audience. I just think there's something really fascinating about that, and I really, really enjoyed it. Now, I could move into TFT, right? TFT, I think, is probably the most obvious place to go to. It's like a Riot product. It's sort of card gamey. It just makes sense. I've not played a lot of TFT. I've played maybe 10 games of TFT. I found it kind of boring. It seems to me... I don't want to say it seems simple. You can create complexity, but I'm not interested in learning the complexity yet. Now, I think if I put weeks and months into TFT, I could find myself enjoying it, right? I think I can enjoy TFT if I try to enjoy TFT, right? But right now, I'm not trying to enjoy TFT, and it's just not my thing. I also fucking hate that TFT doesn't explain what the fuck is going on in the middle of a game, right? I don't really know what my characters do. They've got, from memory when I played it like 2 years ago, right? It shows you like the stats of the characters and will kind of explain what their primary and their ultimate is. But there's not really like a good tutorial for any of this. And it feels really bad to self-teach, in my opinion. I can't really enjoy that much. That's sort of a side point. It's not really relevant to the main stuff I want to talk about. But, there's a line that I try going into casting TFT. It's not something I'm doing yet, but I really enjoyed casting, and I'd like to continue doing that. Obviously, I could do things that aren't TFT, right? I could try and learn another card game and try and be a caster for the card game, right? I could try and cast something else entirely, right? I could, go into the incredibly open, like there's no League of Legends caster, so I'm assuming it's like really easy to become a League of Legends caster. But that's another option, right? And League of Legends is a game that I like a little bit more than Teamfight Tactics. But again, LoR used to hit this personality matrix of a casting opportunity. It can't do that, and that's probably the hardest one to try and replace, and I have to make the decision now. Do I want to maintain that as an important part of my personality matrix, or do I want to just put that away and say it was a very fun, but I'm not going to continue that? The fifth thing that LoR was a contenty pipe, right? And while LoR is a nice well to siphon content from, I am very willing to pivot to other things that I want to try, whether it be other strategical analyses of other video games, right? I think like there's a world in which I make VOD reviews for things like, you know, Slay the Spire or other roguelikes that I've been playing, right? Or just make general analysis videos on games that I like, or not even games. I can talk about like other things that interest me, like philosophy if I want, right? Or, you know, linguistics, if I wanted to, right? I don't even have to make things about video games. For me, doing content was like 50% fulfilling that like strategic drive that I've got of doing something really strategically, which is what a VOD review was, as well as like a creative drive that I like creating something, right? The idea of putting my effort into a thing and turning it into something is something that I still enjoy, right? Something that I still want to continue, right? But LoR need not fulfill that, right? And what I've tried to say with these 4 things so far, good community, competitive place, casting opportunity, contenty pipe, LoR need not fulfill that, right? And so I am sad that LoR's gone, but it's not like these things aren't replaceable for the things that I want in my life. But those are the last 4. The first thing that LoR was for me was a fun game, right? But my hobby for fun games wasn't card games. It's like it was mainly roguelikes before card games, right? And I need not move to a card game. I want to repeat this point clearly because I think like for a lot of people, their response, or at least in the competitive space, a lot of people for the death of LoR was to move to another card game, but that's not what I need, right? For me, a card game would honestly fulfill these things less than roguelikes, right? So I'm probably going to end up just playing roguelikes incessantly, as well as other games, right? I'm not only playing roguelikes, but it is probably what I'm moving towards. Is just continually playing largely roguelikes and some other things. What does that mean for what I want to do in the future, right? To fulfill these 5 spots, right? Playing fun games. I've been playing a fuck ton of like One Step from Eden recently, as well as Tiny Rogues, which are both 2 roguelikes. I played through Dredge. That was pretty fun. I got that with Sleepy Punda. We both played it sort of simultaneously. That was a good time. And this is, you know, people are going to have a very different reaction to this. I have been playing a fair bit of League of Legends with Sleepy Punda. And that's been a good time. Like League of Legends is a strategically deep game that I think is enjoyable if you just think of it as a strategy game, right? And as a strategy game, it's deep and it's interesting, right? And I'm enjoying that. I don't think I'm going to try and get too far in it. I don't feel the need to get to Diamond or Masters or whatever the high ranks are. I'm really bad at remembering ranks in games. So whatever the good ranks are in League of Legends, I don't have to get there. But I'm enjoying it as an outlet for strategy, right? When it comes to good community, I've got good friendships that I'm willing to continue to foster, and I'm still going to be doing things with LoR, right? Or with the LoR people that I've got friends with, right? Competition, again, I don't need to have the highest level of competition, and if you go to the lower level of competition, just like playing games strategically, right? I already do that, right? With the, you know, roguelikes and other things, right? With casting, I can move on. Or I can try and learn something. Both of those seem appealing to me. And with content, I still want to make things, but they may not just be VOD reviews. That being said, keep in mind, Aegis is still doing one last season. They're doing a final hurrah. I will probably do VOD reviews, but I'm not going to force myself to do VOD reviews for Aegis, right? If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. But, you know, it felt like it was part of the Aegis process, and I'd still like to, if the games are good, to talk about them. But that's pretty much everything I want to talk about regarding my relationship with LoR, right? For a long time, it was an extremely fun game that did quite a lot for me, right? In terms of the decks that I played, in terms of my relationship to it. But my relationship to it changed over time. And I guess this is like a big point that I forgot to articulate. I can't just return to LoR as merely a fun game, right? I don't think I'm going to be opening it up to just play ladder and just play One Cost Madness, right? Maybe I'll do that once every couple of months, but unlike what it was to me at the very start, where I could just spend 3 hours every day playing One Cost Madness, I can't do that anymore. That is just not what LoR is to me, right? It became 5 things, and I can't get the same enjoyment out of the first thing anymore, which was that it was a fun game. That's everything I want to talk about regarding LoR universally and in terms of my relationship to it. I know this video is a little bit different from, I think, a lot of people's reaction to the notes, but I think these thoughts most accurately present how I felt about LoR, and I wanted to make this video in my way as opposed to a different way, right? But this is everything I want to talk about LoR. Final thing I want to talk about was the Path of Champions. You can ignore this if you don't care at all about the Path of Champions. The video's ended for you if you don't give a hell about the Path of Champions. But I want to talk about the Path of Champions a little bit. The game mode's not great. It's all right. I played a lot of it when it came out. I loved the Diana Leona event, and I loved the first Path of Champions with the 5 Bilgewater, Lab of Legends with the 10 champions, and then the first Path of Champions with the Bilgewater champions. I thought those were pretty good, but I always expected that it would become more in terms of depth, and instead it became more in terms of width and breadth, right? And I think that is like my main issue with the Path of Champions in general, that it feels like a very broad game as opposed to a game that makes each individual run feel deep. I think it's a fairly common criticism of the Path of Champions to say that it's not hard in a fun sense. It just tries to make you overpowered, right? That appeals to some people's personality matrix. Feeling overpowered is great for some people. That doesn't matter to me in my personality matrix. What I want is a strategically deep game where I have to make a tough decision constantly throughout my Path of Champions run. The game does not ask me of that, right? Maybe 1 in 10 runs do you have to make a decision that feels like you're weighing very difficult choices that speak very interestingly about what the run will look like and are sort of making and breaking in a very tough way, right? The game sometimes does it when your star powers and your levels perfectly align with the specific type of enemy that you're fighting, right? I personally find that to be extremely rare, that it lines up in just the right niche that it feels not like absurdly difficult or absurdly easy. When I say absurdly difficult, I don't mean like, it's hard, but you can still win. I mean absurdly difficult, like, it's literally impossible. Like a 0-star Vigar going against, I want to say, the first fight in Kaisar is something that I've tried quite a few times, and just the infinite statage just outmills your deck, for example, right? Obviously, most people's response to what, playing 0-star Vigar into Kaisar is saying, well, level up your Vigar. But that doesn't really solve the issue in my mind, which is that you can upgrade your champions with levels and star powers and get them to a higher plane of power, right, which can make it go toe-to-toe with things that are of a higher plane of power. But when you actually do that, the gameplay experience that you're rewarded with, I don't think feels strategically deep, right? You can try and press your head against the wall for very specific combinations where you're 1 or 2 stars down or a bunch of levels down to try and find the strategically deep spot. I just think that it's so rare and such a bang your head against the wall scenario to find something that feels deep, at least from my experience with the Path of Champions, right? That strategically deep thing can be fixed in a few ways, right? Trying to make the game more strategically deep to appeal to a player like me. And the game doesn't have to appeal to a player like me, right? If the game wanted to appeal to a player like me, they'd reinvest into PvP, right? But if they were to try and invest into a player like me via the Path of Champions, the ways I imagine they could do that is by, 1, making the roguelike-y element of the game more interesting, right? This means better events, right, that have more interesting decisions, items that are more interesting to choose from, powers that are more interesting to choose from, enemies that are more interesting than the enemies that we have, and a more interesting way to deck build, right? Because the way you deck build in Path of Champions is very, very basic, right? All of those would increase strategic depth in some capacity, inevitably, right? And I think when a lot of people complain about the Path of Champions, what their complaints are is of that, but I wanted to pull it one step back and say how it relates to the difficulty and what I desire for a game in general, right? I don't want to assume that the desire for a game is strategically deep. If your desire is strategically deep, then obviously the difficult part is that there's not enough strategy to actually input in your run, but you need to pull that back and say it's about the way that the run's sort of categorized. Another way to do that is by simply letting you level down, right? If I was able to upgrade my star powers and not feel as if I can't experience, star power 0 against a 2-star because I've already upgraded to 2 stars, so the only time I can have fun is by fighting Galio now or by only fighting Asol now, I just think that feels awful, right? I think for me personally, it feels really, really bad that by upgrading a champion, I am not allowing myself to experience a difficult game, right? I just think that feels awful. And I like the idea of going to 2-star for something like Vigar and seeing, can I beat Aurelion Sol with 2-star Vigar, right? Or 2-star fucking Jinx or whatever, right? I don't think that's unfun, but I don't want to upgrade my champion to level 3 and then not be able to experience the level 2, especially if by the time you get to level 3 or star power 3, the game becomes unfun for me, right? Because you're just overpowered for no enjoyable reason, right? I think if they add a level down mechanic for both champions and levels, I would play the Path of Champions way more than I do, because I think there's actually like decent fun that you can have in that game if you can actually have manual control over the strength of your champions, right? I don't blame that you can't automatically level up instantly, right? I get that drive of trying to increase your strength is fun for a lot of people. But the fact that you can't level down really saddens me. And I've wanted a level down mechanic in the Path of Champions for like 8 months, 9 months, right? I think that would solve most of my issue with the Path of Champions, and I'd probably play it quite regularly if I could choose the difficulty of my runs before I go into them, right? In the same way that Ascension allows you to enslave the Spire, even though I typically play the highest Ascension I've got unlocked, I still get to choose my difficulty level, right? The fact that in the Path of Champions, the way you choose your difficulty level is a one-time decision that can only make the game easier for you, so you have to do the harder fights, right? But in a way that doesn't guarantee that it's fun. It just guarantees that the power numbers are different, which means they often don't align in a strong way unless you get really, really lucky with the specific stars and values of the enemy gamers. It's not enjoyable for me. And I might be hoping for something that can't exist within the Path of Champions, right? What I'm hoping for is that I can consistently choose the star strength of my characters and the level strength of my characters and say, okay, I'm going to challenge myself by doing this thing into this thing, right? And maybe I'm saying that it's a fool's game to try and do that, but I hate the feeling that I'm disincentivized from leveling up my champions because of this. That's my main issue with the Path of Champions, right? Obviously, I'd like it if the game was deeper and like had more interesting events that made you think about the game interestingly, and like the powers and the items weren't so blowouty a lot of the time, right? But those are my main thoughts on the Path of Champions. That's everything I want to talk about in the Spidz YouTube regarding the announcement, right? It's a bit of a different video for it, but I think that's everything I wanted to talk about. Hope you appreciated it. I hope you enjoyed hearing my perspective on it. If you did, let me know, preferably via comment. I don't really care if you like the video. That doesn't do anything for me, but comments allow me to interact with the people that I care for. That's about it. I guess the final thing is, like, what can you expect from Spidz YouTube? Is it worth being subscribed? Probably not, but you'll probably see 1 or 2 VOD reviews for Aegis. You might see me talk about other video games, right? I'm probably not going to do the every episode thing that I did for Hades, right? I didn't enjoy that by the end of it. I think if I were to do it, I'd do it entirely differently, right? It'd be a very, very, very different experience. It'd be like extremely tightly edited. But I don't think that's really what I want to do. I really like making strategic videos, right? Or an analytical videos, and I just felt like the Hades stuff wasn't feeling that niche. I'll probably make things about other video games at some point, because my main hobby has always been video games, right? I don't know if I've made that particularly clear. I love playing video games, right? I just think it's fun, and it does a lot for me in terms of what I want out of my life, in terms of strategy and enjoyment. And so I'll continue playing video games, and if I want to make videos on them, I might. But it's your choice. If you're only here because you specifically like LoR, then feel free to stop. That's everything, I guess. See you later, alligators, and I'll see you whenever something gets uploaded. Bye.